What's going on?
Okay, let's go.
Welcome to Policies and Priorities. Quorum, and I call this meeting of Policies and Priorities Committee to order. First order of business is the adoption of the agenda, and we have a member of the library here, so I'm wondering if we can adjust the agenda to move that forward so that we can deal with that. A motion by Councilor Papp. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. So with that being done, asking for a disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof.
No, Mr. Chair.
No, Mr.
We
Chair.
have none. Okay.
Let's have a motion on the amended agenda.
Oh, motion on the amended agenda, sorry. Councilor Papp, all those in favor? Opposed? Carries, okay. That's amended. Moved by Councilor Ribbiak that the Policies and Priorities Committee received the issue summary report outlining the library operating agreement, and that committee recommend that council approve the agreement at the next regular meeting. Open for discussion.
I think Councilor Kirsty.
Councilor Kirsty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to see this come forward. Well, it outlines in many cases things that we are already doing with the library, for the library, and together with the library. I think it helps to codify it and put it in a document so that going forward, should there be changes in staff or council or directors and staff at the library, it's there for reference and will help to guide the relationship between the library and the town going forward. So I'm pleased to see it, and I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councilor Ribbiak.
Thank you. I have some questions and I guess a bigger question as well, but some specific questions, if I may, with regard to the
Go ahead.
report.
We'll see if we can find answers for you.
Great. I'm looking at the library agrees to be responsible for changes to the property as required for the efficient operation or aesthetics of the library, but in no case shall lease costs exceed $3,000, except in the case of, just wondering where $3,000 came from. What's that all about?
Just wondering, Councilor Kirsty, as representative of the library board?
Yeah, that's a sort of a historic agreement that goes back a couple of years ago. We had a meeting with the CAO and our treasurer and director of the library at the time, and the chair of the library board, I think. And in looking at the costs and what was a sort of a break point, it was all agreed by all the parties that $3,000 was manageable by the library board within their budgetary framework, and that anything over and above that would be taken care of by the town.
Okay.
Capital to the town. Madam Treasurer?
Just to add to that, sorry, it's also the capital threshold, so anything under that is considered operating.
Good point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another question I had was with regard to building capital and operation and maintenance. I'm sure I'm just missing a word in this, but I'd like to know what that word is. That the library will not, during the said term or at any time prior or subsequent thereto, purchase, acquire, or use any electric current for lighting or other purposes except from the company of the said building. And I'm wondering what I'm missing in that, because it doesn't make any sense to me. There must be a typo. There must be a word missing. I wonder if someone could just look at that and maybe supply the paragraph in the original.
What page is that?
It's hard for me. It says, well, this is page 33 of 39 of the entire report.
Okay.
Okay, it's the first, under the building capital and
and
operation of and maintenance highlighted, it's the first that the library will not.
Yeah.
That's a fairly standard term in a commercial lease, that the building is supplied with electricity from the normal hydro grid, and that in order for the library to purchase electricity independently from another supplier, they would have to come to the town and get permission to do that. That's basically what that says.
So that's what it's meant to mean. It's just that the words I agree with the proposal. Obviously, they should, and I agree it's standard, and it's probably standard boilerplate. But there's probably something missing in there. Just wonder whether somebody could just take a look at that and make the language a little more clear. I have another one. This is on page 35 of 39. And I didn't catch, this has to do with insurance, I didn't catch a requirement for the library to actually have insurance. It indicates, I don't want to go and read the whole thing out loud to everyone, but it's just, that clarity wasn't there, that in fact the library ought to have an insurance policy, and it probably does, but it's just not in here.
Madam Treasurer?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there, the library is insured through the town of Pelham policy, and then we just allocate the expense over to the library.
Oh, okay. So it isn't required to have its own insurance at all?
Would that be?
Well, it's being a town asset, eh?
Okay, fair enough.
Where does it say that?
And the last and perhaps larger issue is that there isn't a lot of detail with regard to the nature of or the extent of library services.
That's in the hands of the library board, that's not ours.
I didn't hear the question.
Library services.
So
No, that's not it.
I understand the concept, Mr. Chair, but this agreement is not going to indicate any minimum level of service that we would require of the library board to satisfy the town that in fact services provided. That's just not meant to be a part of this at all?
My understanding is that we give money to the library board for the operation of the library, and it's up to them to, through their staff, to do what they need to do. Councillor Kersey, if you can.
The moment that the Council of the Day established a library board, they gave all control of library services to that board. The Library Act is extremely clear on that. The town has no say whatsoever with respect to provision of the service, other than assisting by funding or provision of facilities. That's it, period.
So, Mr. Chair, and thank you, and again, I understand that concept. But if I may, just hypothetically, if the library decided to close one of its two buildings and provide no library service there at all because, for whatever reason, there's nothing in this agreement that precludes them from doing that.
No.
Close both buildings.
And that is, if I may continue, just to think out loud, because having created a library board, we no longer have a say with regard to that if they came to us with a budget for activities and those activities were not in keeping with shape, form, amount, whatever the council is happy with, what's its recourse? To dismiss the library board and appoint someone else?
I don't know, we can do that.
Well, one of the recourses is you control, for the majority, the purse strings. You control 90% of the budget. So if, for example, the library board went wacky and decided to do everything but provide library services and came forward with their budget, you could withdraw financial support. That would put an end to the argument very quickly, because that's the only real stick that we carry.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry if this is getting too onerous. So in the discussion with regard to the purse strings, are we in a position to say you can have the money you're asking for if we are satisfied with the level of service that you provide, and not being satisfied with the level of service you're providing, we're not going to open the purse strings? Is that a discussion we can actually have? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That satisfies me.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Certainly, I appreciate, I guess, working backwards from Councilor Rubiak. I think when this was first presented to us it was probably a year ago or longer, that we have some sort of agreement. One of the items was on real property, on buildings. So there was a case where the library all of a sudden had to put a new roof on, and they had to fund it out of their annual grant, et cetera, and then it needed to be clarified. So I appreciate the clarity, but I thought that some of it would be about a minimum service level, for lack of a better word, and I think Councilor Rubiak used that. So if there's another tool, i.e. the budget, maybe that will be a discussion. So it's kind of odd, but in theory, you say, okay, we're in charge of the buildings, here's the buildings, and the library board could say, yeah, that's great, but we're not opening at all, ever, and we're just gonna be online or something, I don't know. Maybe, it could happen in the future, I guess, right? So, so that's something we have to think about, I guess. So I appreciate that conversation. Second, the report or the agreement makes reference to a Schedule A and B. We do have A on our desks, there's no B. Did I see?
Mr. CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're correct. You do have a Schedule A. First of all, I apologize. I uploaded the document without including the schedules. The reason why you only have Schedule A is because what Schedule A is in essence Schedule A and B. They're both the same thing. So I need to go back and either change the Schedule B's to A's, or my colleague and I from library need to go and pull out what's in Schedule A relevant to Schedule B. So it's just a logistical exercise. But in essence, A and B are included in what you have in your paper handout.
Okay, thank you. The counselor, Mr. Chair, Counselor Ribbiak spoke about, and there was a discussion about insurance. Is that covered under Schedule A, accounting services, insurance administration? Or does it need to be codified?
The information that was given is from the treasurer is that the town's policy is all-inclusive in covering
I
the activities of the library.
I understand.
Go ahead.
Is it covered? I want to make sure it's written down.
Yeah,
right?
insurance administration is insurance that the accounting services are, it's part of the accounting services that the town
I guess
provides to the library.
I wonder if, maybe we'd ask staff whether it needs to be written down, the goal of this is similar to some discussions we've had. If it isn't written down, everybody has different assumptions on it. So maybe we need to write down, not just insurance administration, but we say insurance, the town provides the insurance and charges the da-da-da, just so that it's crystal clear.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
not a bad idea.
you know, I think put it in, we have a schedule, let's add it to Schedule A, B.
Staff direction?
You could put it right in the body on page 35, above the fact that it says that the library covenants that it will not carry on any activities that would render the town's insurance void. So you could put the insurance clause above that, and I think that would satisfy that. Sorry, Mr. Chair, for butting in there.
Could we direct staff
Yeah.
to
I think it should be
move in that
included.
direction? Okay.
I think it should be included. Good. And just, this information wasn't provided to all of council, so I just wanted to hear, has the library board seen this? I know that, or saw this, I know that we are waiting for this to come to us. So they're going to consider it on Wednesday?
Library board meets on Wednesday,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, and that'll be part of the discussion.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Counselor Pat?
Very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just picking up on the issue of governance and the operation of the library services. I'm not telling you something we don't already know. We made a commitment to another facility in operation. So part of the responsibility of that board is to ensure that that is followed through, but legally, the way that I understand it, and from what they can determine that, and the control we have over that is the financial aspects of how that operation runs and what we determine that municipal asset, because it is our asset, correct? And what we consider that asset and how those services are delivered is, and I know where Councilor Ribbiak, that it's implied, but sometimes it's not implied, and then some directions can be changed. So I think we are on record with what we're planning to do in Fenwick, so I'm not too worried about it. And if there's changes to the agreement to solidify those types of things, then we can bring it back.
Counselor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in quick response, and we need to make sure that this document doesn't preclude
Right.
any of those powers and abilities that we would have
No, it
going
does
forward.
not. No. Okay.
Okay. Counselor Kersey?
I'm not at all clear what this discussion was just about.
Okay, can we make this crystal clear,
Honestly, I
Counselor
really-
Pat?
Maybe it's the time of night, but I'm missing something here.
Okay, well, I'm.
Like, we're gonna bring it back or not? What?
No, I'm not bringing it back. I'm making, the question is, does the board of the library have the ability to govern and run its operation? The answer is yes.
Yes.
And does it have the ability to determine what level of services it needs to provide?
Yes.
Yes. So what I'm saying to you is that, based on what Councilor Ribbiak is, we made a commitment to Fenwick to build another library. So just be the devil's advocate. If that board decided, and I know you sit there and said, no, we're not going to continue, what opportunity, what leverage do we have? And the leverage we have, as we've already determined, is through the financial aspects of it. Also, because we also offer, and this is not a different than any unusual, and I'm not finding it, how could I say, humorous, because governance of a separate corporation has been debated many, many times in municipalities, and the library boards has been probably one of the most contentious. So I just don't want it to be side railed, that we're going down the same track, they're going to be given X number of resources to fulfill that, and they will do that. Notwithstanding the fact, and I'll use it, how can I say, Councilor Kersey, don't have the right word, if in fact they want to change their mind, they could.
Well, if I may.
Highly unlikely.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think the question will boil down to, if the facility is created,
Right.
the library board will make a proposal in a budget on how that facility should be operated and the level of service to which it will be operated on, and will quantify the cost of such operation. If the town, in turn, says, I'm sorry, we don't have that much money to give you, the library board will have to go back and relook at the level of service that they can provide for the dollars that we give. So it's an argument of the chicken or the egg. But
They own the chicken and
if
egg.
we own the facility, but they've got to put the programs in the facility.
the hen house? No.
So that question is going to come up when their budget comes forward to us. Okay? It has nothing or very little to do with the operating agreement we have.
Actually, I was just going to make that point. We're way off topic on this, and
Well,
I
I
think we're gonna-
apologize, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
off
we're gonna
topic, but
stop.
that issue, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
In-
but that came up as a result of a discussion of whether they have the ability to change this operating agreement, and there was, with all due respect, there was no reference, as Council Ribbick mentioned, about how they go about governing it. So I withdraw it, and I apologize for bringing that up.
And if in fact something goes on with the new Fenwick Library, that will be dealt with at the time.
Thank you.
Okay. I have one concern, and that's on page 35 of 39, and it's, and the town shall not be responsible for any personal injury, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Under under joint and several, we're going to be named there, and it was very adamantly pushed aside by Madeline Mayer at the bear pit. Twice she was asked about joint and several, and she has no desire whatsoever to change her opinion of joint and several, and in fact, the deep pockets is going to be the town, so if anything happens there, we're going to be in trouble. I'm just wondering if we could get some kind of movement going that we can change the opinion of, she did indicate if you could give us some good rationale, I may decide to change it. So I'm just wondering if I can direct staff to have a look at how we can get away from the jeopardy of joint and several that we're going to be involved in these things. Under the current wording, it's not, but Madeline Mayer did indicate that if she could be convinced of it, that she would listen. So, but in my opinion, the two presentations that were made at the bear pit were perfectly clear, and yet it went, so you just didn't want to hear it.
Entirely, Joe.
Yeah, so, but anyway, that's something, and perhaps staff can give that some thought, and if we can maybe set up a lobby or something that can just get their attention to say, this is a real issue, you better start realizing it, because it is a very real issue, so. Okay, and that's, any other comments or questions regarding the library summary, issue report regarding the library? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Now we'll go back to, moved by Councillor King, that the Policies and Priorities Committee receive issue summary report, Old Pelham Town Hall acoustics investigation for information, and provide direction to staff regarding the installation of the sound reducing panels at Old Pelham Town Hall. The report is giving some options there, and we open it to the floor for any questions or comments. Councilor Ribbiak.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what work has gone into, and I'm sure quite a bit has, determining the number and the placement of these panels in order to ensure that they're going to be effective once they're installed. I noticed that one of the alternatives is to look at a consultant, and I'm not sure we would want necessarily to do that, but I know that acoustics is a bit of a science, and I wonder how much of that science has gone into this planning.
Madam Director, perhaps you can give us some information on that?
I can through you, Mr. Deputy, or actually, Mr.
Chair, Mr. Chair.
The investigation really involved talking to the panel distributor. They came and did measurements to put together a reasonable budgetary quote, and they explained at that time what our options were and what other similar buildings have gone through, auditorium-style empty buildings that are used for these kind of user groups. So they took the measurements, they forwarded the quote based on the different rooms and how they would be used. They offered, or they also did suggest that if we wanted to get more scientific, that we could hire a consultant to see what the other options are, but suggested this is the industry norm at the moment. If I may also add, as I didn't put it in the report, and it was noted that the user groups have noted they would likely not be returning in the fall if this isn't somehow addressed. Not to apply pressure, but to say we just want to get some action.
Councilor Rubio.
Mr. Chair, for clarity, I think it needs to be done, and I want it to be done, but I think that whatever gets done, number one, ought to be effective, but number two, ought to be done, I guess, at the best cost possible. And I just wanted to know that we're satisfied that, in fact, what is proposed will actually be effective. What I'm hearing is that the supplier of the material says that, gee, no, this is going to work for you. Buy it.
If I may respond through you, Mr.
Absolutely.
Chair. They did also supply a lengthy list of municipalities they've done work for, building names that they've installed these into, so I wouldn't have any doubts that they work. I'm just not sure that's the only option. This seemed to be the one that's the low-hanging fruit, that's the most common in the industry. They did note they wouldn't have to note or to install anything on the ceiling, that it's strictly wall panels. They felt they by their measurements, they knew the minimum they could put in that would be effective.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure it's going to work out. Have we checked with any of those references to, just to,
We, through you,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, we haven't yet.
oh, will?
We certainly can. Yeah, this hasn't even gone through quotation process. We
Oh,
would
okay.
get 3 quotes.
Okay.
We would follow through. This was just to prepare a budgetary estimate to say, what are we looking at here to do this retrofit?
Where's this?
Okay, I'll ask this question. In your opinion, should we look to another consultant to find more? Would you recommend that, or would that be necessary pending the successful reports from these other people that have used these installations? Perhaps that would negate that. If in fact there was not a sound yes or no on that, would it be advisable to look to somebody else? Putting you on the spot.
The treasurer is looking to add something.
Okay.
Or just through the process, this process was just to obtain a base quotation so that she could put something in the report.
Okay.
But technically, when we go out to the RFP process, we give broad spectrum of what we're looking for, and then they come in with all the different options that are available. And there's
Perfect.
multiple consultants that do that, and it's the best way for us to look at all of the pieces instead of just one.
Perfect. So there could be a dozen people coming in.
Absolutely.
Okay, very good, thank you. That clears it up. Councilor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My immediate response or reaction to this was to defer it until 2016, but having heard that this important piece that we could lose user groups, I think kind of changes that reflection a little bit. Madam, through you, Mr. Chair, Madam Treasurer, how do we fund this? It's not in the budget? How are we going to, where's it coming from?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would come from the facilities reserve.
And there are sufficient funds in there to support something of this nature?
I don't have it with me. I believe the reserve is in a deficit at this time, but it does recover itself after a few years, so. So we're borrowing from other reserves for the time being.
But it is affordable. It seems necessary, so it is affordable.
It is a necessary, project that needs to be done so that we don't lose the revenues from the organizations as well. So it can be, there can be other projects that are looked at in the facilities area that might be able to be deferred until 2016 to offset it as well. That would be my recommendation.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much. Just a comment, I guess. There is a distinction that's here between the seniors' room and the main hall. I don't know how much use the seniors' room gets versus the main hall, but I would think that the issue is more with the main hall as opposed to the seniors' room, so. And then the other is custom painted versus pre-finished. You know, it's an historic building, and whatever we do, we want to make sure that it's, I'll say, hidden as much as possible and doesn't take away from the beautiful revitalization that occurred, so that's what I'll be looking for when
Trying
it
to
comes to us.
keep within the heritage theme
Yeah,
type thing.
if possible, and try to hide it as much as possible.
Okay?
McDonald's, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at just giving staff direction to move forward on finding the possibilities there. That's what the motion states. Any other questions or comments?
And I think with that recommendation on budgeting, that's an important factor. You know, if it is in the range of $30,000, what's that going to do to the reserve? What are we going to forgo, et cetera? So
Get it going.
we have that information when we make the decision.
Okay? Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moving right along. Moved by Councilor Ribbiak that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue summary report, erect a digital sign to replace the existing sign for information, and recommend to council that council approves the replacing of the existing sign with the digital sign for the Bethany Christian Reformed Church, 1040 Balfour Street, Fenwick. Questions or comments? Councilor Kirsty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting this, but I will follow it up with a request for a staff report as to whether we should be amending the sign bylaw to take this requirement to bring electronic digital signs back to council to deal with. I think we're going to see this issue arise more and more and more as people move towards electronic signs. So perhaps we need to have a policy or to incorporate in the sign bylaw something to deal with best practices with respect to digital signage and forego the, putting the proponent to bringing it through a council process. So that's all I would say.
Okay, so can we
Deal with
understand that the motion will deal with strictly for Bethany is tonight with direction for staff to explore possibilities of
Delegation.
revision of the sign bylaw?
Thank you.
Okay.
And/or delegation, Mr. Chair. The bylaw is flexible enough that it said approved by council or delegate.
Okay.
Council could say, we're going to delegate it to the chief under these conditions or whatever. So it may not require an
I'll ask the chief for some comments.
amendment to the bylaw.
Mr. Chair, this is the direction that council took, can't remember how many months ago, but when digital signs started showing up,
Yep.
you wanted that, you were concerned about the big ugly signs, like the large signs that are going up in Thorold and 20. So it really kind of understood the direction that you wanted to approve the digital signs. We can, I mean, I could take it on the simple signs, but when it comes to digital signs, some of them get quite overpowering, very bright, you know, they're evasive, and I can't remember, maybe 6 months ago, that's the direction that council
Yeah, it's
wanted to take. And you
2014.
wanted the authority to review all digital signs.
May 2014.
There you go, okay, so it was longer than that, but that's what you requested.
Okay,
Brought
so
it to
that,
council.
but, and again, the words or delegate now, I'm just wondering if we were to somehow tweak the sign bylaw, that would negate the need for it to come to council and put it in bylaws hands or in the planning and development or by, at the building permit stage. Councillor Kersey?
I think there must be communities out there that have developed best practices for dealing with this, and perhaps it's a function of the brightness and the intensity of the light that impacts oncoming traffic or some of these sort of things. That's why I had requested a staff report to look at it and bring it back to us to say, communities that have been inundated with this have dealt with it in this way. And
Okay,
this is the
so-
best way to do it. So, yeah, there is some flexibility in here. I think what we were worried about is the gigantic ones, as you alluded to, but here we are with the church with a little tiny thing that's, they've had to go through a council process. So I think it's,
Okay, so we'll be voting on that with direction for staff to investigate best practices. Okay, can we take that, Chief?
That's good.
Okay.
Would you like me to rewrite or add an amendment to the bylaw to include that?
or bring forward a report
Maybe.
prior to that.
Maybe not.
Mr. CAO, then what's our best line of action on this one?
I think just come back with a report, Mr.
Just,
Chairman.
that's a report,
Just
okay,
right here.
that's good. Okay? Any other questions or comments on the Bethany issue? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that carries. Wrong pen. Moved by Councillor Kersey that the Policies and Priorities Committee received the issue summary report, Timber Creek Stormwater Management Facility Maintenance Investigation for information. Questions or comments? Councillor Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the question I have is I notice that a letter is to be issued to the developer. Has the developer been apprised? We just finished talking about engaging people. Are they aware of the situation? Or we just sent the letter to them? Or we met with them face to face?
Mr. Chair, we have not met with them. We have not yet issued the letter.
Okay.
So we can arrange that, as a phone call or a meeting first, rather than just a hard letter.
So-
Absolutely.
That would be a good idea.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Madam Director. That's what I think would be very apropos.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Rubin.
Just a general question for information, if you don't mind. It's been a while since, I guess this thing has been awaiting the town to assume responsibility for this. And I know that there are other developments where it's been a while, that it's been out of our jurisdiction, but the developer hasn't really responded. Is there some sort of standard or length of time that we tolerate these things being outstanding like this? Is that something we ought to deal with?
I think with these changes in staffing, I think some of these things got lost in the shuffle, and I'll let the director perhaps give a little insight on this as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just so I understand, are you talking about the length of time for assumption or response to this particular matter?
No, just in general terms. There are a number of properties, I guess, around town which we have not yet assumed responsibility for, and yet, of course, our residents assume that we're responsible for them and come to us with that. How long do we generally allow that to go on? Is there any particular standard that we want to go to? Is that something we need to deal with? That's my question in a very general sort of way.
Mr. Chair, I might defer to the Director of Planning for this one. We've certainly faced it on our end. What my answer has always been is that the carrot to dangle back is that we hold their securities, and that's usually what entices them to come back to free that money up. But we are dealing with some other areas that are 20 years and still not assumed.
Well, that's my
And
point.
we're not really holding a lot to compare to what the deficiencies that start to be created are. But certainly maybe something that Barb might want to
Timber
speak
Creek certainly has been a challenge right from the onset.
Yes,
Madam.
thank you, Mr. Chair. The subdividers agreement specifies conditions under which works will be assumed by the municipality. And it also specifies, at certain levels of construction or completion of works, that letters of credit will be drawn down and so forth. And then often what happens is the last thing is a bylaw that's required to be passed by council to assume the plan of subdivision, assume the roads, assume the stormwater management facilities, those are the big ones. And it's a process that seems to have slipped on many occasions, and so as the directors indicated, we do have some instances where we've got some subdivisions that are numerous years old and have not yet been assumed, the bylaws have not been passed. So it is something that we want to be working on together to try to, bring some of those forward so that we can clean up the books on that matter.
Thank you for that. I have a concern that we're receiving this for information, and it's very good information. However, if the information stops here, I think it's losing a purpose, because I'm being questioned almost daily by some residents of Timber Creek, especially those who were on the petition list. Mr. Moyer and Mr. Boss are the two who are the main spokespersons for that group. And I'm just wondering if somehow we can communicate to them that something is being done. They've expressed to me concerns that they've put in a petition over a month ago and they've heard nothing from anybody. And, what I would like to see, and I've in full explanation, I was telling the information that staff have been giving me, and they're fully understanding of that, but they're becoming impatient, and they're just looking for some information. So I wonder if we can communicate something to these folks to say, we are pursuing, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to mitigate the situation, and these are the steps that we need to take, just so that they're aware that we are trying to do something. Right now, we are trying to do something, but they're not aware of that. This is what I would like to see go out to these people, if that's possible.
We most certainly can do that, and I can put a formal response together to the petitioners, perhaps.
I've been copying you with the emails that I've been getting, and you can see that there is some concern there, and it's just a matter of some communication from staff, just to say, this is the situation as it sits. I have gone back to them and said, we haven't assumed this yet. We're working on things, but I did say tonight that I was going to ask staff to do some communicating with them, and I think they'll be looking for, for something like that when you get the time to do it, and perhaps after you talk to the developer to say, okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing here, when are you going to get at it? So, this information would be valuable to them, and I think they would be eased a little bit if they receive some communication, and appreciate that.
I would suggest if we could wait until we have that meeting, just so that I would also know what the developer's response
Absolutely.
position is.
And I could pass that information along to these folks if they ask. Actually, one has asked me this evening, so I will pass that along, that this is the situation as it sits, staff is working on it, and we'll get back, and then that's at your time, okay?
Sure.
I appreciate
The only
that.
concern I have is that they're, and you're probably the first one to receive this information back from them, is their concern is also about the algae and about the odor, which I haven't smelled yet, that this won't address the recommendation that we're giving, or the request we're giving to the developer isn't to deal with the algae. It's simply to cut the weeds and maintain the area and make it a little bit more cosmetically pleasing.
I'm sure that when the developer is aware of some of his duties to be there, that these people will be making that clear to them as well. So, but yeah, I think it will evolve, but, they would certainly appreciate some communication as to what's going there. And I would appreciate that as well. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I agree with you. Communication is important on many issues, so this is another good example of that. So pleased that we're going to be doing that. I was surprised that we hadn't assumed this subdivision. Madam Treasurer, are you, maybe through you, Mr. Chair, are you aware, do we have the securities as on this subdivision?
Sure. I did receive your email requesting that information. Unfortunately, I was in meetings all day today and was not able to obtain it. I'm not aware of the exact name of the subdivision, the developers. I was going to touch base with the Director of Public Works. But most definitely, if they did put a deposit together for us at the time that they were required under the subdivision agreement, there's the security deposit, and then there's the letter of credits that are reduced. So we can easily look that up, and I will let council know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I guess just the other one is, and I appreciate certainly the response from the Director of Planning and Development about the various subdivisions. Interesting to know which ones are assumed, which ones aren't assumed, or maybe just a list somehow at some point about which ones are outstanding, and then it can be one that we can work our way through.
Yeah, it was reported at a previous meeting that by the Director of Public Works that she is working on all of these things as well, so this probably will be coming later, and I know you're inundated with a lot of good stuff, and that's our welcome to you to Pelham, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Respond, the clerk's department has been very helpful. We've been compiling, that list has actually been compiled
Oh, great.
as part of the legwork for all the ponds, not just this one, to see where we're at for assumption. We've already distributed that back to planning, so finally we all have a good picture of where they're at. That could probably be distributed to council so that you're aware as well.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It carries. Moved by Councilor Ribbiak that the Policies and Priorities Committee receive the issue summary report, develop a draft bylaw which addresses frivolous, retaliatory, and malicious complaints for information and recommend to council. That council reviews the draft bylaw and gives consideration for approval at the next council meeting. Questions or comments? Councilor Ribbiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for jumping in so quickly every time. I had some concerns with regard to this report, though in general terms, I would say that there's certainly something needed by bylaw enforcement regime to deal with these kinds of issues. But it does occur to me that really we ought not to give anybody, I guess, unfettered discretion with regard to what they're going to pursue or not pursue when someone comes forward with a complaint. I guess the opportunity is there for charges of favoritism or preferential treatment, or, you know, you check this one, but you didn't check that one, and it has to do with who you know and that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering whether there isn't some opportunity or some need to create some at least even broad objective criteria that under which one can respond and say, no, we're not going to pursue because this is, and we know that because, as opposed to simply declaring something to be vexatious or frivolous, or we just don't have the time to deal with it because it's too small. Something I think needs to be there in order to ensure that we avoid the kind of discussion that we had not so very long ago when we had bylaw enforcement that was exercising its discretion in, it turned out to be very unacceptable ways, and we ended up with a pretty serious problem. So I'm just wondering whether we can give some thought or ask the report to come back with some thought given to what are the objective criteria. What would be the general comments that we would give to someone to say, you know what, we're not going to pursue that complaint because it didn't meet some specific requirements that apply to everybody.
Thank you. I attended a workshop at the AMO conference, and it dealt with this, and I'll offer a name of Robert Swayze, who was a solicitor and integrity commissioner for several municipalities. He indicated that the question was asked, just what you're saying is, what do you say is, it takes us too long to do these things, and his answer was, there are some so obvious that it takes you 5 minutes to clear them up because you know who they are and what they are, but you've addressed it and there's no question that you didn't address it. And I will pass that information along to you, Chief, if you want to pursue this. He was very experienced at this and had written many papers about it as well. So I think that would be a good way. And he was fully cognizant of just exactly what you're saying, where we could come under some scrutiny if, in fact, we're perceived to not be doing our jobs, but he had certainly ways that he could get around that, and I'll pass that information along to the chief for reference, and I'm sure he would be more than willing to answer to us, because he did indicate that he's written a few papers on it as well. Mm-hmm. So that's a good one. Your point is very well taken, but this guy seems to have a pretty good answer to it, and something that we can, if it fits us, we'd be able to build a sound policy around it, so, and that's good, because some of them are so obvious, but again, if you don't act on it, the newspaper will grab it and make us look like we're not doing our job, so we have to really cover ourselves, but I'll share that with you, Chief. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I did send an email to the chief on this earlier. It's similar to what Councilor Ribbiak spoke about. We did approve somehow, or staff came up with a protocol that's used. And I guess my question is, why can't we just use that protocol for all bylaws? Why do we need a special bylaw? I still don't understand, Chief, so.
Chief, perhaps you can elaborate on your rationale behind this?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, you're correct. A few years ago, based on the past history, we developed a work step procedure. So for someone to file a complaint, and it's complaint-based, they either go online and fill out the form, or they come into the station and fill out the form. We take the form, we review it, and are times when we can answer it within, a minute or two and fix it. But just having that work step procedure in place, it has deterred a lot of people from making malicious and whatever retaliatory complaints. The problem that arises isn't the onesie-twosies, and to really nail it down as to make it not subjective, make it all objective. I don't think we can get there to get it that finely tuned. It's the people that, when I talked to the Director of Public Works about this too, and she runs into similar problems, is that you make judgment on a particular property. A guy comes in, he wants to sever his property, and his neighbor gets upset, and over the next 2 weeks, he hands in 15 complaints. Under the work step procedure, my bylaw officer has to process all 15 of those on this paper, and we're wasting so many resources. So it's not the onesie-twosies I'm looking at. I'm looking at the guy that walks in the door, walks around his neighborhood or drives around this town, and comes in and hands me a list of 15 complaints. Everything from signage to zoning to businesses and backyards to dogs barking. It's ridiculous. We don't have the time or the resources to entertain these people. And I want to be able to give him an answer saying, we deem this malicious or retaliatory, and we're not going to entertain them. That's what I'm looking for. It's that ability to say that to those people that are going out of their way to cause problems for us. That's my intent for this.
And looking at resources to find best practices out there, and besides Mr. Swedes, I'm wondering if legal opinions and best practices of other municipalities might be there. I think we need to do a little more research into that before we come, because it could open a big can of worms. Mr. Mayor, you're...
Yeah, and I appreciate the chief explaining it a little bit more. I think in our work step protocol, it's if you're complaining against your neighbor, well, it's pretty clear sort of thing. But if it's somebody going around, and even you can throw out the ones I thought under the work step, that if somebody's sign was whatever, and then they drove around the neighborhood and they said, here's all the signs, you toss it out. We were concerned about health and safety, and so I do see that in the bylaw, and I think it's important to have that there. How is that going to work in relation to all this? And then I guess the final thing is, this does talk about citizens, complaints from citizens, or if they're not citizens, whatever. So maybe Councillor Durley's suggesting, or suggested, Mr. Chair, about looking at these resources. There might be other best practices in addition to this one here that we can kind of weave together that would be appropriate for our municipality. So,
Okay, so I'm just wondering if we would best
send it back.
send us back and give you some of these resources that we can explore to perhaps fine-tune this so that we would be able to be in a cover yourself situation, so that we're not perceived as being ogres rather than, doing a job that's beneficial to all. Okay, Councillor Kersey?
is there not also an inherent right to appeal? Let's say that the bylaw officer deemed it to be frivolous, vexatious, that the complainant could in fact write a letter addressed to mayor and council and it end up on our agenda. So there is a sort of a backdoor appeal for another look that's almost implied in almost any of this stuff. Or is it something that should be incorporated perhaps in this bylaw because it is giving such discretion to the bylaw officers? It would protect our bylaw officers and give us the complainant an opportunity to appeal to a higher level.
I'm not sure, we've designated that response, like the Committee of Adjustment has, that the appeal of the Committee of Adjustment goes to the OMB.
Right.
You
No, I
can't come
understand
to us type of thing, so I'm just wondering, is that, Mr. CAO, can you offer us, is it implied that council is the appeal body to anything that is done? I don't really think that's the case, is it?
I don't think it would be an appeal body, Mr. Chairman, but any citizen would have the right to write a letter to either their councillor, representative, or council as a whole. There's nothing preventing that, and if council felt that there was an issue there, they can certainly act. But to act as an appeal body of some sort, I don't believe is the council.
Okay.
Just on that, what's it called, the tribunal that the clerk is overseeing? Whatever that's called, when somebody gets a,
Temps?
yeah.
The
Is that only for parking, or is that for like other bylaws?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that specifically relates to the monetary penalties
Okay.
from that bylaw, but if a bylaw specifically sets out an appeal mechanism, then that is your appeal mechanism, as well as the enforcement.
Okay.
That can be set up as an article in the bylaw.
So I think send it back. I think that's the right suggestion.
Okay, so can we turn that back to you, Chief, for a little more research? And I'll share with you this one contact, and, you know, perhaps we can look to others as well, and maybe you could come back in next P&P meeting and with something just a little sounder with the basis of others' experiences.
Sure. Through Mr. Chair. Yeah, for sure. I think if I were to build an appeal mechanism into it, so it doesn't allow me just to, shut the door on somebody and he's got a second body or somebody to go to appeal, to listen. To me, that makes sense. Councilor Ribbeck, when you say that you want it more defined, I really don't think I'd be able to define it to say, okay, if it's more than 3, we won't entertain it, or if it's because of if you read some of the complaints and how they come in, and people marching in the door and dropping a piece of paper on the desk with 15 complaints on it, it's really difficult to pinpoint that. So would an appeal mechanism add to this suit?
Just wondering if Integrity Commissioner would enter that? If
I didn't come back.
whatever, yeah, there's all kind of things to look at, and staff will, the CAO has indicated that he will get the gears in motion to get something come back to us on that.
Mr. Chair, if I might, comment
Yes.
was directed to me, and just let me respond if I can.
Okay?
And that is simply to say that the very people who would put a report with 15 complaints on it on your desk are exactly the people who will make your life hell if they're ignored or somehow put aside. And that in order to short circuit that process, it would be great, and I don't know how practical it is, but that's, and you're of the view that it might not be all that practical, but it would be great if you were able to say, no, I made the decision in accordance with the guidelines that were presented and within the framework that's there. And it may require, I guess, some creativity in order to figure that out. And it sounds like some people have put their minds to it, and there might be some ability there. But that's the only reason that I raised it, is that it would, the very people who put those notions forward, or those complaints forward, are the ones who are just waiting for the opportunity, in many cases, to find a way to twist your tail as well. Anyway, that's my comment, Mr. Chair.
So I will, refer, get a motion to refer this back to staff for further consideration. Councilor Papp, thank you. Motion to refer back to staff as brought by Peter Papp. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Might have time. Moved by Councillor King that the Policy and Priorities Committee receive the issue summary report, development of a draft bylaw to address grass cutting on boulevards adjacent to residents' properties for information, and recommend to council that council review the draft bylaw and gives consideration for approval at the next council meeting. Questions or comments?
Exactly.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you. I had some issues with this one as well, and given the time, I wonder whether we either defer this for discussion later or make some sort of a motion with regard to the curfew.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes. You think you're going to talk longer than 5 minutes?
Well, I don't know that it's going to be me talking for 5 minutes. I'm just pointing out that I have some concerns, and it might take that. So let me go at it, and you can deal with it as you want.
Okay, when we get to 9:57, we'll extend, I guess, or whatever.
Terrific, thank you. There's a lot of road allowance in this town that's maintained by residents, and whether it's boulevards or not, boulevards I know are the specific subject of this thing. But often that's done with considerable cost and effort on the part of the homeowner, but it's great savings to the town, because obviously if they weren't doing it, we'd have to do it. And since the vast majority of our residents do it, I think we need to take care not to create any form of resentment by telling people that they must do what they are now willingly doing. And I think we could do ourselves some harm if we went through that. So those who do what they think is right, they do it as good residents. But those who don't, boulevards or anything else, may have good reason. Not all boulevards, of course, are the same size. I think there was some indication the conditions of various boulevards might be different. So I guess what I'm saying is that we don't want to put people who aren't dealing with their boulevards, all of them, painting them with the same brush. Some of them may have very good reasons, and some of those reasons may in fact well be beyond their control and not have anything to do with respect to their attitude. So I think that a bylaw needs to basically indicate that we are highly appreciative of the fact that most people do what they need to do. Those who don't, maybe there's a cost associated with that, and if that's a cost that needs to go to them, then they pay the town, and the town gets it done, or does it any particular way. I'm just a little leery of putting into bylaw a requirement for people to do what is generally being done now, and it might turn the thing around. So anyway, that's my comment. I tried to get it done in a couple of minutes. I don't know how clear it was. So go ahead.
Other questions or comment? Councillor Kirsty?
I just wanted to have some idea of the quantity. I mean, are we taking a shotgun to kill a mouse? Like, is it a small number where we could take it on, those few that are being ignored, can we just have our grass cutter cut them and forget about it, as opposed to going through a whole long harangue with a bylaw, and then we have to enforce the bylaw, and then we have to add it on their taxes, and then we have to try and collect that, and all the bad will that creates. So I don't even know what I'm dealing with here, what the quantity is. Are we talking about 10, 15, 100, 500? I don't know. So
before we get into that, and I will ask the chief for some comment next, we're at a point of very close to curfew time, so I'm going to ask for a motion to that the rules of procedure as contained in the procedural bylaw be suspended, and that the specific meeting curfew time of 10 o'clock is hereby waived, and that we carry on the business of P&P, or all of the business, or a time frame.
10:30.
10:30.
10:30?
We're not done by 10:30.
Who's going to move that? Councilor Papp? Until 10:30? Or when we finish business, and does that include the in-camera? No. That's just the P&P, okay? 10:30, or we finish the business of P&P. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Chief?
Mr. Chair, it's a very small amount. We're not talking hundreds. One of the main factors is the works department is stretched to the max. They do not have the resources, the manpower, the equipment to cut any more of what they're cutting now. So But I'm saying that we do have a bylaw in place for grass cutting for their properties, but we don't have one to address the boulevard. So if some guy leaves his lawn 8 inches or longer and he refuses to cut it, we have provisions in place. We serve him a letter and we say, if you don't cut it within so many days, we're gonna send a contractor in, cut it, and we're gonna bill you. I don't have that mechanism for these boulevards, and if you look at a property just east of here, where his boulevard is this long, and yeah, it's a small piece, but for us to ask Public Works to go do that, I think it's way too much of a stretch. But if I had the extension or this bylaw that allows us, then we go down, we serve them a letter and say, you gotta cut your boulevard. And it's not it's just a small amount of people that just do not wanna cooperate. And it's just not boulevards, the type of people that just don't wanna do anything. And it usually answers, the properties around town that people do not cut their grass, it usually just a visit by Craig or a letter, and it's cut within a couple days. So we're just looking for a mechanism where we can go and say, please, we cut the boulevard.
Okay. We ran into some of these challenges with the sidewalk clearing as well, when we had the mandatory, so the situation is real. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The report says that there's no legal implications, and it says a number of municipalities do this, but the one particular property owner that you're alluding to, I'm sure, similar to what Councilor Rybak said earlier about some of these folks, would take this to the wall. And I'd like to know whether there is the authority in which to do this. So, you know, when this comes to council, if we approve it here, I'd really like to know that piece. Do we have the legal authority in which to do it? Do we have a legal standing, or is it in the Magna Carta? That's what I want to know.
The very same questions were asked about the sidewalks as well. So,
Yeah.
you know, like that's your property, it's not mine, and that's so. I'm just wondering, Mr. CAO, is there some way to establish the legalities?
I will read the Magna Carta and get back to you.
That's what they threatened, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so can we defer this for now and waiting for some of this background information? Okay. Motion to defer. Counselor Pat? Defer for, until next PSP? Does that work?
Well, I didn't say necessarily defer, I just wanted to know the answer when it came to council. So, unless others want to get into it a little bit further, and I'd be happy to defer.
Well, there was some question about legalities, and I'm just wondering if a legal opinion is necessary, or Mr. CAO?
We'll go back and
need to
look
do
at
that.
it, and we'll report back to council in the next meeting.
Next PMP? Okay, the motion to defer till next PMP. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moved by Councilor Kirsty that the Policies and Priorities Committee receive issue summary report, winter operations policy.
There's another matter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This was just something I'm bringing forward tonight.
Okay, 5-7. Okay, sorry. That's not here.
Mr. Chair,
There's no
just,
resolution on it.
No resolution.
this was added to the agenda, Mr. Chair, at my request, if you don't mind. Councillor Papp and I were present.
You're the guilty party.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Papp and I were present when some residents living adjacent to Marlene Stewart Street Park were complaining about folks driving in and out of the driveway there, dropping people off for pool lessons, etc., and that they, in their estimation, they were driving too quickly. They had come up with a solution of speed humps. This is here as traffic calming, and I would just, the reason it's here is just to ask staff to put together a kind of a report to study it and make recommendations. So that's,
Staff direction you're asking for? Then?
that's all, yeah.
Okay, that's in order. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I apologize for missing that. I was going from the green, not from the white. issue moved by Gary Acursi, Councilor Acursi, that Policies and Priorities Committee issue summary report winter operations policy, and that committee recommend the council adopt winter operations policy. Questions or comments? Councilor Acursi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First I'll give a little background. Most professional organizations are very reluctant to put standards of care into a policy. They may lay out a standard of care, but they're very reluctant to put it in a policy because it becomes law and it becomes a tool that can be used in a lawsuit against the professionals. So you'll see very few professional organizations which will put this type of standard of care into a policy. So out of that opening remark, I have a question. Has this been reviewed by legal? And does it supersede provincial standards? We have provincial standards that have been put out there by the province that we should be working to meet, but to set up a policy such as this, are we opening ourselves up to legal action? Should we shortfall on any one of these items that we recognize here as a key fact and fall short even a little bit, it gives a tool for a lawsuit in that circumstance. So the only question I really have to Mr. Chair, and sorry to be long-winded, have we had legal comment on this as to whether it's a good policy to be enacting?
Madam Director?
We have not, through you, Mr. Chair, we have not. The first 5 items, A through E, in the winter operations plan are legislated, and the remaining are internal plans for how to manage those remaining items, but none of those, the winter operations plan has not been through legal.
All these are fully documented as being done and full records being kept of all of these, or no?
It is, and it's renewed every year. The plan is renewed, which is what we're trying to get the framework for now. So we started with the policy, and we're already updating the plan based on our sort of debrief of how last winter went, and using the legislative requirements as our sort of bare minimum standards and moving up from there.
Okay. So, okay, I'm just wondering if policy would be more beneficial than bylaw.
I think it's very good to have a plan.
With this is a policy, yeah. Okay.
But do we really need a policy? That's the question. I know it sounds like it's hair splitting, but it really isn't. So you have an internal document that is a plan on which you administer the winter control. But if we incorporate it as a policy, it in fact becomes fairly rigid, and you must meet that standard. Whereas the other, there's more wiggle room. So all I'm asking for is, should we have legal have a peek at it? They may say, no, it's fine, good, I'm happy, but.
Okay, I'm just looking at this, though, there's nothing that's really specific, it's like staff training is staff training. It doesn't say staff training shall be this, this, and this, or equipment maintenance is obvious because we have equipment maintenance people. Some of these seem to be necessary to the day-to-day operations. Madam Director?
Mr. Chair, the intent I had there was to make sure that the plan, the topics of the plan became policy. So we have positions or guiding statements within the plan of what our minimum levels of service are for the non-regulated items. And the regulated items, it's pointing to the legislation, but it's giving a little bit more meat and potatoes on how Town of Pelham addresses those requirements. So my intention was to make the policy about what gets incorporated into the plan. It's why I purposely didn't attach a copy of the plan. I don't know in the details if that pulls the plan in as being enforceable as well.
Mr. Mayor, you had a comment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to that point, the policy says, I mean, it's important to have it saying that we shall maintain a comprehensive winter operations plan. That's what it's saying. That's what the policy, and that we provide relevant information communicated to folks. Essentially, that's what so then the plan is the plan. But probably good to get legal on it. So if I could change gears slightly, I was surprised not to see something that Councilor Papp alluded to earlier, and that was sidewalks. So this is to provide safe driving conditions, but what about walking conditions? We also have winter operations plan for snow removal on sidewalks and trails and all those other things. And I wondered if colleagues wanted to.
Sidewalks are mentioned under A, 4A, response to snow accumulation, plowing sidewalks, special requirements for emergency response in buses.
Okay, but it's not in the how might we, so in an effort to provide safe driving and walking conditions.
Okay.
I think if we include that, then the operations plan would then have to include something about sidewalks and or I think trails as well. Do we do trails? Do we not do trails? Those kind of things.
So what's your
So
suggestion?
I would ask that those be included.
Okay. And also bouncing off legal before,
I'd be happy with that.
okay, could we use that as staff direction, Mr. CEO? So if we can, again, get that one out and get it back with legal opinion. Sorry, Madam Director, go ahead.
Just to clarify, would you suggest the policy go through legal or the policy and the plan?
Councillor Kersey?
For sure, the policy.
The plan is the plan.
plan is the plan.
The policy is what we're going to be under the microscope for.
Right.
Okay, so motion to refer this back for those purposes. Councillor Pratt? Yeah, for legal opinion and for,
I just didn't know if it was just gonna have that before council or referring it right back, so thank you for the clarity.
yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moved by Councillor Kersey that this regular meeting of Policies and Priorities Committee be adjourned until the next regular committee of the whole scheduled for Tuesday, September 8th, 2015, unless sooner called by the mayor. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Thank you.